there was links between the ancient Nazca culture in Peru
Hmm.
coming up all through the United States with the Adena culture. And you have effigy mounds in Wisconsin with the bears and all these things that are these huge earth mounds that kind of follow the same type of idea and creation as the same people in Nazca, Peru, thousands and thousands of years ago. So how are they connected? Was there, a way of traveling back then between those cultures? Did they share things? And I think the biggest giveaway is the symbol of the 3 steps. You have 3 steps, and you find that symbol meaning the exact same thing all the way from Peru, Bolivia, all the way into North America to the Mississippi culture, to the Adena culture. You find these 3 steps, and it's the same steps that are on the crown of Isis. It's the same steps on the crown of Nephesis. It's like they're identical symbols meaning the exact same thing.
Right.
This is their connection, and nobody has put this together.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you are watching or listening. This is the Holistic Monitor, and I'm your host, Nick Sconia. The Holistic Monitor is a wellness podcast featuring life energy research, health and wellness transformation, self-improvement and empowerment, philosophy, spirituality, and now guest interviews as well. We look forward to your comments on our YouTube channel at Holistic Monitor, and you can also listen on the go with us at Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and more. And with that, let's get today's show started. Welcome to the Holistic Monitor podcast. I'm your host, Nick Sconia. Today we are excited to welcome Jason Quitt, an acclaimed author and spiritual teacher who has dedicated his life to exploring the hidden knowledge of our ancient past. In his latest book, Astral Genesis, Jason shares his groundbreaking discoveries on the hidden astronomical and astrological code within the hieroglyphics of Egypt, the mound builder monuments in the Americas, and many other ancient megalithic structures around the world. Join us as we delve into this revolutionary work and fascinating world of astrological correspondences and explore the mysteries of our ancient past brought to the light. Today we learn how the ancients were connected globally with an ancient code on the Holistic Monitor with our guest, Jason Quitt. You've written a book, Astral Genesis, and it is, I'd say it's groundbreaking work on the hieroglyphics and, of course, worldwide monuments. In the hieroglyphic sense, you've found something that for, I'd say, thousands of years, people have been staring at these hieroglyphics and not seeing the specific remedy, this diagram within the hieroglyphics, which I find is quite amazing. You've almost opened a key to the hieroglyphs themselves. Not to say that it's the only key. There's definitely more to it. And you put out other books too. Can you tell us a little bit about your work prior to this book?
Sure. It was the prior work that actually opened up this information to me. The first book that I updated and put out was called The Egyptian Postures of Power, which is about mysticism, movements, and meditations. And I've been working on this information since at least 2007.
2007. Okay.
2007. So the Egyptian Postures has been around since about 2007. And it all started with out-of-body experiences. So I was having these out-of-body experiences where I was going to a temple, and it was an ancient Egyptian temple, and I'm standing with a person who looks just like the Egyptian statues, and they were holding a posture.
Okay.
And instinctively, I knew I had to copy them in this out-of-body state or dream world, whatever lucid dream you want to call it.
Yeah.
And as I did this, I felt something open above my head, energy flowing through my body like I've never felt before. And for me, it was such a profound experience that it kind of sent me down this journey of trying to figure out what these postures were that I was seeing in these journeys. So it was a very shamanic type experience. Um, so I've been studying shamanism, ancient civilizations. I've been doing a lot of out of body travel, so experiencing different paranormal things, and trying to put all these pieces together. Because I found it very frustrating reading other people's works, hearing other people's interviews, because it wasn't the experiences that I was having.
Right.
It wasn't the information wasn't fulfilling for me. So I started to work on trying to figure out what all this meant. So from that, I really got into mysticism, the ancient ideas of hermetics, the ancient philosophies from Egypt, the old Egyptian Book of the Dead, the pyramid texts. Like I really kind of got into that kind of mindset to try to figure out what was happening to me. So there's two books. One is The Postures of the Sun, which is the first book, this. And there's another set of postures, which is the postures to the moon. So what I was going to do is I was going to divide the books. So I was going to write one book, the first in the series, which was about the sun and different mysticism and postures and movements, and basically my journey of discovering this.
Right.
And then this summer, I was going to write the moon book to go along with this. And I'm starting to work through the moon book, and I'm working on a chapter called The Brazen Serpent, which is basically astral theology, as above, so below. Basically that the mysticism is a correspondence between what we see in heaven. So the stars in the night sky, the movement of the sun, the movement of the moon has a direct correlation to what's happening on Earth. And it's from that kind of mindset that these ancient practitioners, ancient priests put together, I would call it the first religions, based on astrology, based on nature itself, the cycles of nature and the cycles of man, cycles of woman. They were all combined and then put into allegorical stories, mythologies, and kind of packaged like this.
Right.
And my what I was really interested in is this whole death, afterlife, and rebirth. Because, you know, in ancient Egypt, it's all about that. It's all about the resurrection. It's all about Horus being reborn, you know, Osiris, the judgment. When you die, you go see Osiris, you're judged. And I was very curious about this because experiencing out of body travel and, you know, connecting that to near-death experiences, I wanted to kind of pull these things all together and see if my personal experiences related to, you know, what is being said in these ancient texts. And what I found more is that instead of it being more related to the out-of-body state and more related to near-death experiences, it was really more talking about the cycle of the life of the sun and how it journeys through space and the stars every single year, and how it marks time in the seasons. And I found a direct correlation between that, and I found that mind-blowing. Actually, for me, it was to see how precise it was. It was very eye-opening to me. But then, as I was going through that chapter, the Brazen Serpent, I'm looking at the pyramid texts. I'm looking at the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, and I'm seeing these symbols, and they're kind of like catching me up. Like I don't know what to do with them. And I can see that they have an astrological significance. So, for example, like in the book, I'm showing the image of Horus as the savior.
Right.
And, you know, he's standing on two crocodiles. He's holding a a scorpion in one hand, he's holding serpents, he's holding a lion, he's holding all these symbols.
Mm-hmm.
And in astrology, these symbols are known. It's Leo, it's Scorpius, it's Aquarius, and what are the snakes? So I started to I'm trying to rewrite or reconnect, what are the original meanings of these symbols within the symbols?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And that is what kind of started to crack open this journey for me.
So it's like a picture with 1,000 meanings, depending on how or where you look and your knowledge. So kind of like you unlocking this key allows you a different view into what these hieroglyphics are saying. So you can interpret it a little differently, maybe increase your awareness as to what's going on in the picture itself.
Yes, and we know that, and we're even told this in school, that all of these ancient civilizations, they were solar worshipers.
Right.
They're all sun cults, and they make it seem like they just prayed to the sun and that was their god.
Right.
But as I started to go through this, it was so much more complex, and it was based on this very ancient knowledge of how it works. The whole cycle from the sun at its death, which is the lowest point of the year, which is winter solstice, and how it and then it starts to come up to the equinox. It has to do with the tilt of the earth. I mean, these are all very scientific concepts that were taught in grade school today.
Right.
But for them, it was the entire world. It's how the heavens moved. It's how the earth moved and the sun moved. And depending on how it moved or where the sun was in the sky during what constellations or what time of year, they would have to change their life. They would have to change their work schedules.
It's life or death.
To match, to sync up to those stars. So it became like the pulse of life.
Right.
And if you weren't part of this synchronization to life, it would fall apart into chaos. And this is why the sun was so important. The moon, it's the easiest way to calculate time because it's like a timepiece. You could look up at the moon and see the phases of the moon.
Right.
But the moon phases are not in line with the seasons.
Right.
So if you just depend on the moon, things will go out of phase. So in ancient times, they're always trying to combine the moon and the sun and the stars and trying to find the exact perfect calendar. And this is why they had multiple calendars, was trying to get everything perfectly in sync.
Right. Line everything up. Yeah.
Yeah. So
live in harmony, I guess, would be the goal.
That's right.
Harmony with the natural forces. Yeah.
That's right. And this is, the whole concept of spirituality, the whole concept of health, the whole concept of life in general is how do we become more connected to our environment? And by doing this, we get closer to God.
All right.
So the people that knew or the most knowledgeable in the forces of the world, forces of nature, forces of time, they became the high priests. And you remember in ancient times, the priest would foretell when the eclipses would happen. And that would prove that, yes, they're divine. They know when things are going to happen. They could prophesize when these eclipses would happen.
Right.
But to them, it was a science. They understood the movements of time. They knew and could predict things coming in the future because everything is circular. Everything has a cycle. But to the average person who didn't know anything, it was like they were directly in contact with God and they knew the divine will and what is going to come.
Right.
So
kept their power basically in place with the culture.
That's right. So knowledge is power, and we see that play today. It hasn't changed at all.
Right, it's the same. Yeah, if you can predict the future, you've got it. It's worth gold.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So it started there, and so I started to see a symbol. Started to and what I do is I take the symbol, I put it on my computer, And I try to find the best example of it that's a straight on picture, because you can't have it taken at an angle, because it changes the perspective.
Okay. You're talking about actual pictures then?
Yes, actual like pictures of the symbols. So I had to try to find them exactly straight on, no distortions.
Right.
And then I had to draw them for the book, because illustrations in books are the way to go. You don't put pictures; they don't really work well.
Yeah, no.
So I was doing that anyways, and I'm drawing it on Illustrator, and I'm doing a couple symbols, and I noticed that a couple of the symbols, they were different symbols, but they kind of were laid out in the same fashion. And what I did was I drew a line from, let's say, their feet to their hands, or from their eyes to their hands. And it kept getting the same dimensions, or the same angle.
Right.
And I kept getting this 23 degrees, 23.5 degrees to be more precise.
Right.
And I realized right away that this was a very significant degree. And it's the degrees that the Earth tilts every year from the equator to the northern hemisphere to give us our summer solstice, or to the southern hemisphere, which gives us our winter solstice. So it's kind of like a solar code. They knew that if you looked at the horizon, the sun would rise at different points on the horizon at different times of the year. And they measured those degrees of where the sun would be on the horizon. And they took those measurements, those degrees of where it was on the horizon and where it was at its height and its altitude during those times of the year. And they encoded that directly into their tools, into their artwork, into their statues, into their architecture. And it just...
Yeah, it seems to be everywhere.
Everywhere.
Now, you mentioned that it seems to be very specific to the solar deities, or what the solar deity had command over or control over in the world.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's correct. So what I found was that because the code isn't everywhere.
Right. I was going to say it's not lining up with moon goddess or
no,
something like that, but something that relates to the sun or the sun's path in the sky as an important element.
Specifically sun gods. So if you're looking at the sun gods of Egypt, like Ra or Horus, you're going to see those motifs of following those degrees. When you go over to Samaria and Babylon, you get like, say, Shemesh or even Ishtar, and you look at their artwork, it's all the same. It's all aligned to this thing. So whenever there's this kind of solar motif where they're talking about the sun, or trying to characterize the sun or personify the sun in a certain manner, they'll create the image with the actual dimensions or the geometry that the sun follows in the sky. And it's not random, and they're tuned. So you can have various images of the same god in various postures with various tools or various crowns. And each one not only represents the sun, but it will represent the sun at a specific time of the year. So you can, let's say, look at the god or the solar god, and let's say they're holding a grain of wheat in their hands.
Right.
That connects to Virgo and talking about the autumn harvest.
So signifying harvest, right? Yeah.
Right. So it has to do with the sun traveling through the year at different astrological points. And you'd have the sun, which is at its greatest, would be the summer solstice. And then the most interesting ones, which we see so many different motifs of, is the equinoxes. It seems the equinoxes were very important. And this is where you get the dual gods, or the gods with two heads, or holding two serpents, or even when you get to other cultures, it becomes a bird or an eagle with two heads facing two different directions.
Right, like Masonic. 33 degrees.
Yes.
The Janus god.
Yes.
The
So
dweller between two worlds, that kind of thing.
that's right, upper and lower world. And, that same motif goes all the way back to Göbekli Tepe, to the pillars. So it's this ancient understanding, I would say, of how the world is divided. And when we say upper and lower world, or the bird looking to the north and the bird looking to the south, or east or west, it has to do with this idea of light and dark. That half the year you have the sun ascending or standing up into its greatest power, and then half the year of darkness where the sun is dying and it goes to its death. So you have this cycle of birth, death, and resurrection of the sun, which is this motif that is continually being reused for all these different solar gods. And it's the same motif that's used currently in Christianity as well. So it's nothing, they say it's nothing new under the sun. And now it makes a lot more sense. But there was another thing that blew my mind about this code. And it's seen in the Egyptian artwork, it's seen at Göbekli Tepe, and it's seen in a lot of Sumerian artifacts. What this is it has to do with latitudes on Earth. And because the Earth is round, and because we have this tilt, this 23.5 degree tilt of the Earth, depending on your latitude, which is calculated by the North Star, depending on that latitude, the sun is in a different position. All right. So if you're at 0 degrees latitude, the sun is above your head at the equinox. But if you're at 30 degrees latitude, it's not. It's to the south. So it's 30 degrees off from where you are. And so you have
spatial awareness, basically.
Right.
On a globe. Yeah.
Right. So what I found incredible was that the artifacts would actually encode this offset of degrees of the North Star. So it would record the latitude of the sun at the position where the artifact is located.
Okay, so Stonehenge, for an example, just throwing that out there.
I haven't done Stonehenge. Now I'm gonna have to do Stonehenge.
Yeah, get the overhead, the Google.
Yes.
Google Maps on that one. But so basically, if you're not on the equator, at the equator it would be 23.5 degrees.
Yeah. Yes. At the equator, at the equinox, it would be actually 0. It would be 12 o'clock above your head.
Right.
And then during the solstice, it would be 23.5 to the south, and then 23.5 to the north for the other solstice.
Would that signify that they were aware of the equator?
I would definitely think so.
Okay. I know that there was a lot of issue in the Middle Ages with finding a South Pole star. They had North Pole, so they had that range. I can't remember which one, latitude or longitude, but they couldn't gauge the other way how far or how big the Earth was, because they couldn't find that fixed southern star. 1400s, something like that. Maybe into the 1500s, that they were looking for this fixed south star.
And I think that's because they've lost knowledge.
Right.
They had more knowledge previously, and this is why it's so controversial, is to say they had more information 12,000 years ago than they do today. No, they'll tell me I'm wrong.
Right.
But if you look at the door, or the gate of the gods, or the doorway of the gods in Peru.
Yeah.
The angle of that door is set to 16.1 degrees south, which is exactly the latitude of where that door is located. So it's like they recorded the actual degrees of where the sun is in the sky at equinox.
Right.
Into these objects, and we find the exact same code, the exact same angles.
Yeah, sun angle. Now, would that allow you to also date that object based on the reference point of where it would be at? Would it be the summer solstice or would it be the spring equinox?
That one in particular, I believe, was the equinox.
Okay. And that would line up with a certain date?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Usually it would be spring.
Okay.
But it's interesting that you would bring up date, because you could actually date these things, because over 40,000 years, the tilt of the Earth changes slightly. So it goes from, I think, about 24.2 or 24.1 degrees to about 22.1, I believe, degrees. So it's a small change,
Yeah.
but it does change. So when you're going back to Göbekli Tepe, it's not 23.5 degrees. It's about 24 degrees because you have to go back in time. So their sky was different, or the sun was different. So they had a slightly different angle, which would actually date it back to exactly when it was dated till.
Yeah. Okay. That's amazing.
but not only that, and this is what would really cause a stir, is my hypothesis or theory that let's say that you have an object like an idol or an artifact from a very specific temple in Samaria. All right. And then you take this artifact to another temple located somewhere else on the planet and you gift it to them. If their priests know how to read the artifact and know the angles of it with the sun, could they find their way back to the temple on the other place on the earth? Is this like a secret GPS type technology where if they know that the sun is different, couldn't they set a course or a path to find that temple or the origin of where this artifact came from?
Yeah. How about that? So it's almost like, hey, come find us, come hang out. Yeah. Very interesting.
Just a theory, but I mean,
yeah.
How did they know how to get to all these different places?
Right. Right. And there were a lot of different places. You have ancient civilization in India, ancient civilization in Turkey, and just Middle East in general, and ancient civilization apparently in Northern Europe, possibly all throughout Europe. Whether they were what we consider to be an ancient civilization or not, there's definitely stoneworks and structures and jewelry. There's a lot of definite civilization visuals that go along with that. And then you have ancient civilizations in the Americas. So in theory, you'd be able to trade a cylinder seal or something like that from Sumeria and be able to gain where Sumer is, even if you're in Japan or something like that.
And they found artifacts in Bolivia, like giant bowls that have Sumerian language on it.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay, I wasn't aware of that.
So how is this possible? And then you get the symbols of the staff gods, or the gods that holding the serpents.
Right.
Exactly the same way. So they're solar gods that, they stand with two serpents in their hands in a very specific posture. And the oldest artifact they found in actually Peru goes back to 5,000 years ago to find the solar god holding these two serpents or staffs. And that motif of the solar god holding the two serpents is found everywhere. So it's
the staff culture. Right.
Yeah. How is this possible? Or how is this information passed on from culture to culture? Or the other solution is this predates everything that we know. This came from a prehistory that we're not aware of. Somehow all these cultures were affected by it or had the information of it, and they've kept it unbroken, this knowledge, through their record keepers. and they encoded it into their artwork. They recorded it into their temples, their art, their history, their religion, even hidden in the words of their religion is this prehistoric knowledge. And I think that's the most exciting part of this, and that's the most controversial part of all of this. Yeah,
grand unification. Well, a lot of it, if you go back to astrology and looking up at the stars and equating the stars and the gravity with down here as above, so below, the sun represents the self or the soul, and you would want to know intricately the movement of the sun for the physical as well as the spiritual. I think the Mayans have two separate calendars. They have a bunch of calendars, but two separate calendars, one that's more spiritually inclined with the same sun signs, and then one that's more for harvest and knowing what to do and when to do it on the earth. They would have it to where 1 month they would be planting corn, the next month they would be at war, and the month after that they'd be celebrating bees, and harvesting honey. So, very regimented way of living based on the sun, but multiple different calendars. I think it all falls back to that, though. I love that the symbol for the sun, the circle that you even have, the multiple circles in astrology. It's a circle with a dot in the center.
Yes.
So it just kind of carries forward from what could be a very old cosmology. It seems to be unified all over the world, but it carries forward through the traditions, and whether it's lent or whether it's secretly passed forward, like if it's borrowed from a culture or absorbed or something like that, or if it's actually passed, that would be a good question.
Absolutely, and I think the root of it has to do with the cosmic man or the solar man, which is the relation of the human body in relation to the sun and the universe.
Right.
And it has to do with ancient humans realizing that they could measure time using the appendages of their bodies.
Right.
So their arm to their hand to the sky, measuring 15 degrees, an hour of sun, and realizing that the human body itself is part of the gear work, or the ratios of the sun are encoded within the body. So the body became the time device, the measuring device of cycles was the human body. And this is where I believe the idea of made in the image of God came from, because we have sacred geometry of nature throughout our entire body, and it's unique because my body is different than your body, but it still follows these ratios, these sacred algorithms that connect us to the cycles of time, to the sun, and to life in general.
Yeah.
So it's profound because you're taking these very mystical ideas or spiritual concepts that could be considered airy-fairy, but you're not. You're bringing it right down to the physical.
It's very grounded. Yeah.
And saying, no, this is like a clockwork.
Yeah.
And let me show you how it works.
This is the science.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. This is why you worship the sun, because you are the sun. That kind of idea. I actually love in the book. It's just the information alone on the counting time with your hand, which I learned a long time ago doing kind of like camping and survival, to put my fist out to the horizon and count with the fingers as to how many hours I had till it got dark. That alone in the book is so valuable because it helps people learn, like, I have a way to tell time, whether or not I have a timepiece, the batteries run out on the phone or whatever. There's always a way to find out and be safe, out in the wilds. It's just one of those little tidbits in the book that's just fantastic. And it's linked right to the hieroglyphics, which is just amazing. It's one of those things that's ancient. I never knew that. I can't even remember who taught me the fist trick. the hand trick on the horizon, but it probably was an old survival wilderness trick, But here it is. It's even older than that, or
And
modern at least.
and you have the symbols like the Ankh and the Waz scepter and the Jed pillar, and these are mystical symbols that have very like a vast spiritual encyclopedia of what it could mean.
Right. Oh yeah, tons.
But it could be taken down when you start, taking the pieces of these artifacts and really looking at them, especially with relating it to the gods. You can see that depending on who's holding the artifact or who's holding the tool is tuned to the god itself, and
Right.
it's an extension of them. It's an extension of their geometry. So it's an extension of their arm, it's an extension of their hand. And what do you use that for? You're using it to measure the sun, you're using it to measure time and seasons. And this is what the tools, I believe the original purpose of the tools were for, was they can, put the staff in the ground and look at the sun and see where it is in the sky, and they can know exactly, how far until the next solstice, how far until the next festival comes.
Right.
So they can become oracles.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
and this
Living
is
oracles.
yeah, living oracles. And this is the
Yeah.
same thing with it's in the Bible too. You have Moses, you
Yep.
have Aaron who's leading the Israelites through the desert to the promised land. How do they get there? How do they know? They have their staff and their rod.
Right.
Is their
Rod
magical
and the staff
tool.
protect you. Yeah.
Right. So it's like you have these things right in the open. It's telling you that they have these things. And when you go further back in time, you start to see how they were used, how they were made, and the purpose of why.
Right.
And that whole story is missing from our record.
It is. Yeah. What you've uncovered is a secret, but is it a secret? Or is it something? I mean, it must be a secret because it comes through time, pretty far advanced into time. I would say I see a lot of the Masonic, the Masonic symbol within a lot of it as well.
Yeah, I didn't want to put a lot of Masonic symbols in there because
Yeah.
people might think
Oh, this
something
is
else. But
it's
if
there.
if you looked at the back of the book with the Peterborough petroglyphs,
Right.
it has this key, this solar key type symbol, and it looks like an F. It's like the key looks like this F, and it's kind of like this mooring rod that, or the tubal cane is what they use in the Masonic. It looks like an F, the Masonic F.
Yeah. The key.
But it's a key. It's a measuring tool that measures time at 15 degrees. So it's an hour tool. And then it measures the height of the sun at different times. And this is found on a petroglyph.
Right.
And then
is it dated, that one?
No, there's no real date. They basically said it's the Algonquin tribe that did it, but even the Algonquin tribe, doesn't really.
They don't claim it.
No, they don't really know.
Yeah. And that's, again, that's what gets lost in time. You said, that this is found all over the world. So it leans towards some kind of connected society or connected culture that would have a like super high priests or something like that, those that were in charge or in control with this knowledge. It does seem like if you had what you have in some of the Mayan glyphs from one of the codexes, I believe it's people canoeing away from a big volcano blowing up to signify where they were before or something like that, which seems like an Atlantis type of idea, that perhaps there was another land that sunk and people spread in 360 degrees from there in the Atlantic or wherever. They ended up in the North Europe, and they ended up in Africa, they ended up in the Americas, kind of all over, and spreading this same knowledge, even if it might get a little twisted, the basics of that 23.5 degree movement of the sun seems to be a very constant thing.
And I think Plato gave a lot of evidence to that. When he's talking about the Straits of Gibraltar or the Pillars of Hercules going
Right.
out to the west, the Atlantic Ocean, and he said that it's through the Pillars of Hercules. It was what was it, 9500 BC? So it's pretty
right.
long. But here's the crazy thing,
From Solon
and
or something like that.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Mm-hmm. And this was in a chapter I was writing in the Moon book, which hasn't come out yet, but I'll share it anyways, is that if you take the pole star, all right, and you turn it back to 9500 BC, the pole star is exactly in between the Pillars of Hercules in the sky.
Wow.
So you have the constellation Hercules, and you have, it's almost like an H. This is where you get the ancient H's from, that everybody was like, why are things shaped like an H?
Right,
it's because of the constellation Hercules. And at 9500 BC, that star is right in between the gates of Hercules. And I believe what Plato was doing was he was allegorically telling you that not only was it in the middle of the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, but it happened when the pole star was in Hercules. So he was encoding actual what stars were in the sky when the disaster happened on top of the story. Yeah.
Right.
It's amazing.
Pushback I saw on that was, what if they were going by a moon count or not the sun count, or the years wouldn't be the same? It would be cycles of the moon. So pushing it back to however many thousands of years the Egyptian priest said would only take it back to, I don't know, whatever it was half the time of some sort. But if you can align it to a star lining up within the pillars, that's, really what you need is that more definitive, what were they using at that time? What was their knowledge base, and what would have marked it? I think that's a big thing, like marking time. They build statues to mark an event.
And when did they bury Göbekli Tepe? It's exactly the same time, 9500 BC. So something happened on this planet at that time. Plato mentions it. Göbekli Tepe is buried at that time. And then you have the ancestors, especially North America, Central America, South America, that talk about this movement from the sea coming in, like you say, the canoes, and starting over again and bringing this knowledge. But anybody that talks about the Atlantis theory, it's kind of like, okay, they're going to throw everything out. They don't have anything to do with that theory.
Whatever.
But people, we did have ancestors that lived in that time. Like, how do you think we got here?
Right.
Yes, there was an ice age. Yes, there was like, I don't know how much ice, a mile of ice where I'm living right now in Canada.
Right.
Back then, but there were places where you can live. And then as that ice receded, you have evidence of people, cave art, for example, in France, going back 30,000 years.
Very far. Right. Yeah. And also coexisting with other humanoids. I don't know to what time, but you hear some of the Sumerian tales. I believe it's Gilgamesh, where he befriends a wild man that was one with the animals, that was only, adapted into humanness by having intercourse with a human female. That broke him of being able to be around the wild animals. But prior to that, he was just out there doing the thing. And that's an interesting tale if we know that we actually had other species of humanoid that we lived with.
And this is another rabbit hole, because
there's a lot of them, right?
Like there's a handful of different humanoids.
Right.
A handful. You think of it right now, we're humans, and that's it. We have races, and but really we're the human race.
Right.
Really.
It's
go back to it. Yeah, go back in time, and there was distinct different humanoids that were not human.
Yeah, they made jewelry, made weapons, made tools. We're living a different totally different existence alongside of us as Homo sapiens. And what's interesting is that you have the bottlenecks. We see it in nature with animal species, bottlenecking. We're causing a lot of bottlenecking too, but species wide, we're just really we won out. We're kind of top of that, the top of the food chain, But we won. We basically pushed everything out. In a sense, I'm saying win, but we pushed everything out like most animals would do, basically just working their way to be a dominant species. And who knows what kind of culture existed throughout that time, because I would say we're not really any different, maybe very slight differences, but I would say not really any difference between now and 50,000 years ago. We're the same human.
And there's been a couple books written, translations from ancient Egyptian stories. I'm trying to remember the name of one of them, but one had to do about the path of the soul. And this is almost 5,000-year-old story. And it's like all the depression, all the corruption, all the things that we deal with today and talk about today,
right,
was written 5,000 years ago. Or like, why? It's a depressing story. It's like, 5,000 years ago, why should I live? Because everybody's corrupt and this is going on and that's going on.
Yeah, same stories, right?
It's like, you could write that same thing today.
Yeah. I when I first read the Upanishads, I was blown away by how connected I felt to the work, that it was such a strong, the verbiage of it was very distinct, and it was like a search for the soul, truth seekers looking for themselves, looking for the self. It was a really good read, and it was carried down thousands and thousands of years ago. Gilgamesh, although he's a very bombastic character, there was a lot going on that was very reminiscent to normal life now in Sumeria, in Egypt. Human beingness is kind of this state that we're here, and what have we adapted? We've put in more technology, developed more elaborate tools, but we're still human. We're still this creature that was here, thousands of years ago.
Yeah, the more I look back, the more I can see forward. I think that's how it goes. And nothing has changed except the circumstances of how we live. Right. But everything else is the same. And even spiritually, we're all still searching for the self. And it's the same search 10,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago. It's exactly the same. We have different words, understandings, and concepts. But, it's just a shift of translation. We're like, okay, they're saying the exact same thing.
Yeah. Different trappings, but we still have trappings. Things that keep us, Yeah. In the book, you go into a lot of diagrams and a lot of the pictures, a lot of detail for people that are really interested in more of the scientific view, which I think is pretty important. I think that your book is going to become a staple for Egyptian tourist guides. They're going to be like, look here, this is information that is very valuable to people that give those tours, because this is very approachable and grounded, and I believe probably very visual as well.
I hope so, because I had a very stringent idea of what these stories meant. I really believed in certain concepts. And when I started to unravel this, I had to break a lot of those old beliefs that I had about Egypt, or what certain things meant. I had to change the translation for myself to understand what they were saying. And because it is such a new concept, because it kind of goes against what I would say mainstream believes of even the myths and the stories related to the symbols, that it will have a pushback. And so I'm waiting for it.
Yeah. Have you had any yet?
Not yet, but I think I've given the book to a couple people in that community,
Yeah.
and I haven't heard anything back yet.
Right.
So it
Quiet crickets.
maybe it's crickets everywhere I'm giving it to. It's crickets. So I'm
Like,
hoping
great
that
book,
it's
thanks.
like they're trying to debunk what I
Oh,
put
okay.
forward,
Hmm.
and it's by I was trying to debunk it too, and that's how I figured it out.
Right.
It's
And
like
that's
I tried.
important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that, again, it's very grounded. It's very obvious, and it's celestial. And this is the language that they spoke. And of course, it would be encoded somewhere in their pictures, in their writing. So again, I see it as definitely something that would be a resource for future generations. You've basically opened up this whole nother view into this culture. People have been staring at these pictographs for millennia and coming up with ideas that we've all kind of said, oh, okay, is that what that means? Just moving along with the program, as it were, as to not really knowing what the heck we're looking at, not having those keys to open up the mysteries inside or the connecting piece. But you've basically said, aha, I found it. I found a unifying principle. And I can't see that it would be rejected. I feel like it's too blatant, you know.
And even today on Twitter, I got a couple messages from people where they would post a picture of an ancient artifact, and they're like, "Does this fit?"
Right, right. I did the same thing. I was like, "Oh, look!" Once I
And
started reading it, I was like, "It's everywhere."
these examples weren't in my book, right? So
Right.
what I did is I just threw the picture up on my Illustrator, put the code on it, and it was like the key just fit perfectly. So I just reposted it and said, "Yes, it does.
Yes, it
Look."
does. Yeah,
You know? And
that's
I've
great.
I've done that to about, I would say about 60 plus
Wow.
things now, and they've all connected in that exact same way. And it's not just the angle. And this is everybody says, okay, 23.5 degrees. It's not just that angle. It's a 23.5-degree angle. It's a 23.5-degree angle offset to the latitude of where it is. So
Right.
you have two different types
Of the location.
of location, and
Mm-hmm.
then you have a 15-degree in there, and that is for the hours of the day. But on top of that, then you have the cubit. All right. So
Right.
then you
Right.
could find the divisions of the cubit, and by doing the divisions of the cubit, then you find the three circles of the solar ratio. So it's like this whole
Yeah.
thing that is connected to each other, and having those elements, it's about 5 different elements. Those 5 elements interconnect with each other and create the grid of how these artifacts are built.
Are actually made.
And,
Yeah.
and when I started the book, I didn't know any of that. And then I
Yeah.
started just with the 23.5 degrees. And then as I was trying to code the other symbols, I was like, these things look like mistakes. But then it's like, no, they're not mistakes. I just don't know what they're showing.
Right.
And then once you figured out those other keys, suddenly it's like all these doors open up.
Yeah. Now the cubit. I feel like I remember from elementary school them talking about the old measurements by the arm. And I don't know if it was based on the king's, maybe that was the king's rule in England, but it was a means of measurement forever, right? And is this kind of proving that out, that the arm was a means of measurement?
That is the key.
That
The
is the
key
key.
is the arm, because it has to do with the ratio from the eye to the outstretched arm to the hand to the sun.
To the sun.
That's how you measure creation. And so in Egypt, the cubit is from the bottom of the elbow to the top of the middle finger, and you have the division of the wrist. So you see a lot in the book. You have a blue a blue rule stick that says 10 by 10, which is cubit. So I just divided it by 10. It seemed to work the best.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cut it off at the hand, then that division is 7/10,
Right.
And I found that those two measurements, 10, 10, full cubit of the hand and the arm, and then just the arm, made up the two different measurements of the sun. And I can just say that that's because you use the arm and the hand to measure the sun, and that's how simple it actually is.
Right.
There's no real,
It's just that
more
easy.
explanation. It's just that's what it is. It's the ratio between your eye, your arm, and your hand to the sun, to the sky.
Right.
And it's not just that, is that you could tell time with the stars. So, different hand positions in the sky, different mudras,
Right.
you see people going like this and you're like, okay, that's the devil or something. But no, they're measurements. It's 15 degrees, 10 degrees, 25 degrees, and you can measure the stars.
Right.
Depending on your mudra or hand figure. And this also had to do with specifically the North Star and the stars around the North Star, like the Big Dipper, because the Big Dipper is also a timepiece. And they teach scouts, they teach survivalists how you can look up at the Big Dipper and know what time it is of night and what time of year it is, depending on the position of the Big Dipper in the North Sky. So all these things are related to the human body, to how time moves in cycles, and the cubits. So that is the correspondence. It's really the arm and the hand is the measuring tool, and all the artifacts, especially the Waz scepter. If you look at the Waz scepter, where they're holding it to where the top of the head is, you're looking at the dimensions of your arm, and the head is your hand. So it's just a symbol symbolizing your arm and hand. So they don't have to use their arm to measure time. They can just hold the staff in front of them.
Right.
And it's an extension of your body in your proportions to measure things. Same thing with the Ankh. Jed Pillar was a little different. Jed Pillar was more of the altitude of the sun in the sky. So it's a vertical. Whereas the Waz is the direction of the sun. So is it going from the equinox to the solstices? And the Ankh was more horizontal horizon, showing, where is that sun rising from due north to due south, depending on east and west. And you can mark different weeks of the year based on their calendar.
Right. Yeah. Now, very, very important if you're navigating the sea, if you're looking to trade, which obviously would be a really important thing at any point in time, still is, to know where you're at in the middle of the ocean. Yeah. This would be a means to do that.
So if you're a hunter and gatherer, for example, or you're moving with the seasons, you have to know where you're going or you'll be lost.
And know when to go.
And know when to go. And if you go even further back in time, to let's say the nomads, when the seasons started to change, the herds of animals would go to different locations in different directions, and they would follow the birds. They would follow the antelope. They'd follow the caribou, the reindeers, all these things. They would follow these animals because they knew that they would take them to where food would be.
Right.
Migration. And if the migration, and if they didn't do that, they were doomed.
Yeah, because there's no food. Follow the food.
That's right. So this is
birds do.
This is really ingrained in our consciousness and our physiology that we had to be. We had to learn from the animals. We had to learn from the birds. We had to learn from the stars and the sun and the plants, and learn their cycles in order for us to survive.
Right.
And we forget that now.
Yeah.
We just Uber Eats things and
It's all
go
provided.
on the internet. It's all provided. But you drop us off, you drop I don't want to say this, but you drop kids off now without any computers or phones in the forest, and you say, come home, find your way home. I mean, they don't have that ability or training.
Yeah, it's scary. Yeah.
So that's the ancient culture, is we were survivalists. We had to know what time of year it was and all these things. And I think that's how it evolved into this very complex solar mythology, complex tools, complex buildings to align to very specific stars or times of year just so you can keep that knowledge and tradition going, because our ancestors did experience the apocalypse.
Right.
They did experience cataclysms where they had to start from scratch. And if they had nothing to start on, they would go back to the Stone Age.
Yeah.
So, having this information was survivalist.
Yeah. Well, and this extension of the culture that they had built. They probably had this culture amongst the other tribes, amongst the other humanoids that didn't have the same culture. They're probably very aware that if not following the sun, if not following, that the life giver, that they were to return to a state like those around them.
And the question's always, well, why do we have megalithic civilizations? Why do we have these megalithic buildings on Earth? And how do they survive all these years? Well, the reason is because that knowledge, that information was so important. They basically made a vault out of stone.
Yeah.
And it's not what's in the vault. The vault is the information.
Is the information. Don't lose the path of the sun. Yeah. And of course, what is it? Göbekli Tepe has a lot of glyphs as well on the monuments, probably to represent the constellations that were configured at that time. I'm guessing.
No, there's a whole new thing, astronomy.
Okay.
And this is getting very big because they've noticed it's so obvious to a lot of people now that, especially in Göbekli Tepe, that they had these symbols, these animals carved into stone that were representative of the constellations. So this is a big deal because this is almost 12,000 years old, and they already had the zodiac. They already had animals representing the stars. So you can look at these monuments and you can start to astrologically decode them as like, well, why are they trying to show us these constellations? What does it mean?
Right.
Very interesting. Like, even a pillar 42, it has serpent, it has Draco, it has Scorpius, it has Cygnus, it has these known things that we use today, they used 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And the question is, did they come up with this themselves? I don't think so. I think this was completely fully formed, and they were preserving that knowledge.
Right. Oh, that culture. Right.
That culture.
Yeah, because it is a little too evolved. The stonework itself is evolved, so that even that alone is coming from somewhere. But then you have a visual system of some sort that bespeaks religion, bespeaks some sort of following, priesthood, something of that nature. And likely that we're looking at a tail end of a bigger civilization, or a more evolved civilization than even Göbekli Tepe. Maybe not, but there are stories in what is it? Might be the Hopi that have stories about the Kachinas, who were their gods of sorts. I'm pretty sure they were the gods that would live on the mountain.
Yeah,
and
the
come
star
down.
Star ancestors.
Who was it?
The star ancestors.
The star ancestors, right? The Kokopelli. I believe it was the tribe of Kokopelli that was not necessarily a Kachina, but they were typified by what looked like, I guess, an ant with a flute dancing. Very popular southwestern emblem in the Puebla or the Hopi, in both cultures, was this Kokopelli, who taught mankind to dance and science, and probably about the sun. But it was apparently a city of Kokopelli, a tribe that evolved and just vanished. The whole city just disappeared. Sounds very interesting that sounds like an advanced culture that just kind of went back up to heaven.
But it follows that same idea that I think Graham Hancock has talked about, especially with Göbekli Tepe, where it was they believe that even in Terahan Tepe, it's a learning site.
Right.
Like it looks like there were people that were being taught there. Like there was different levels of seating and big rooms, and there it looks like a school almost. So it's like, was this a higher civilization that came to an area that was tribal, brought those tribal people into it, and started to teach them their ways of agriculture, of astronomy, of sciences, and things like this, which is like mirrors the same story in North America.
Right. Yeah. Well,
So,
and even Egypt, here, all of a sudden, here's the pyramid, and we're supposed to say that was a couple generations of culture before the pyramid was built, and technology and civilization. So there has to be something very long that precedes that. I would say have to be something very long that precedes that time frame to build up to the point where you're doing that, or a direct influence from a higher culture with higher advanced ideas of technology that could share or teach this knowledge, and then of course devolving into what it became, which is you watch Egypt go over the course of hundreds of years, thousands of years, slowly less and less massive building, I believe, and kind of until Alexander the Great came and sacked it, and that was pretty much the end of the strong culture of Egypt. What was lost at that point,
So, and I completely agree. There was a de-evolution of knowledge, and when you're looking at these things, the only explanation many people have is some type of advanced technology that they use to build these things. And they're trying to wrap their mind around, well, how can they do this with copper chisels? How can they do this with ropes? Or, how can you hoist stone that's like 50 tons, 400 feet in the air? It's like,
Right.
How can you do that back then?
Right.
And I think the best guess that people have today is they built kind of like a dam, like a huge wall, and brought the water from the Nile and floated them up 400 feet. So I'm like, do you know how big the pyramid complex is? You'd have to like create an entire.
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
That's a feat in itself. Like, are you kidding? Like, that's huge.
Yeah, and the ramps would have to be massive. I don't know that there's evidence of the ramps. Sound it seems to be the big factor, because it seems to be a sound temple of sorts. The sound would probably be the means, vibration, getting things down to it. But again, if that's the case, that's technology or a culture that had that kind of understanding of sound that we only currently are coming across with all of our gadgets. We're able to levitate things, very little things, but between speakers, they can actually levitate drops of water, and I'm not sure if they've gotten beyond that, but on the front, let's say.
So we're behind, even though we think we're ahead.
Right.
And I think that remember, they just discovered Göbekli Tepe in the 90s, late 90s.
Was it the late 90s? Yeah.
I think it was around there. And more sites are still being found.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of these sites that are being found are in North America. I just heard that there was one ancient site found in Florida, like South Florida. And it's kept very quiet because there's a lot of condo developers, they bought that land. They need to get rid of it to build on it. But these things go back 8,000, 9,000 years.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So
You have to.
we don't know our history.
Right.
And if you start showing archaeologists, or you keep showing the public saying, well, look at this, they still have this idea of, loincloths and, stone age tools with.
Yeah.
So
They want
I hope this book changes that idea where they can actually see something that's knowledge based instead of artifact based.
a unifying principle, which
That's
is
right.
kind of what they needed. Yeah. Now, you were doing the postures prior as a means of healing.
Yes.
Did this discovery and this work fit nicely into that?
It fit, it fit perfectly because it's actually more confirmation. The whole point of Salute to the Sun or the postures was that you're a part of everything. And by breathing and going into different postures, you change your resonance to the laws of nature. So how fitting would it be to then go from that to finding the connection between the measurements of the body connected to the earth and the sun?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's this perfect resonance between them, and it's a good transitional book between this and now I have to start writing the moon book after this.
And you have more to align the intent and the consciousness through the postures.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the postures are a very interesting thing because it's not just Egypt. Cultures all over the world have different dances or postures or meditation or hand signs, mudras that have spiritual significance. And the more we learn about the body and its connection to how energy flows through it, this idea of ka or prana or chi that moves through the body, it's learning about the self. We're all on the spiritual path trying to find the self, trying to understand our place in everything. And these are just things that open us up to what we are. And I'm a big meditator. I'm very intuitive, connecting to myself. So if I have pains in my body or something's not right or I'm sick, I'll sit down and I'll meditate and try to figure out, where's the imbalance? Is there anything blocked? Is there something not right in the body? And then focus my intention, focus my breath, focus my posture, and literally breathe through whatever I'm dealing with until it's gone. And I found great strength doing that kind of connection of speaking with your body and higher consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you done any work or research into the Hindu culture?
I have, but not an expert level at it.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you have a very ancient Siva was worshipped as sitting in a lotus, emaciated person sitting in a lotus position, meditating. It's like 8,000 years, 8,000 BC, something like that. Maybe it was 8,000 years old from that ancient city somewhere around the border of Pakistan and India. Mohenjo-daro, maybe.
And that's another connection to Egypt, because in the Egyptian mythology, the pillars of Horus, the sons of Horus, they came through the lotus into creation. And it's if you go back to Osiris and Ra, that's also the lotus is a symbol of Egypt, and the snake or the spirit of Osiris or the Ka double of Ra emanates or comes through the lotus to bring forth creation into this world. So it's, you have this overlap of mythology, this overlap of these spiritual motifs that are identical from India, identical from Egypt, identical to Central America.
Right.
So it's amazing. The names change, but it's the same concept.
Right. Yeah. And it's so fixating on the sun. Was there anything with the earth or any kind of alignment with the earth that you noticed? As far as, was it the earth or the person was the earth in relation to the sun and the celestial bodies? Would the person take the position of the Ba, or the body of the earth, or that sort of thing? The position in the heavens?
Yes, yes. So
Okay.
the different positions would relate to the energies that they would be connected to, but the alchemy of the body, of the biological structure, is the balance of elements. So it's like you are the physical earth, the
Right.
body is the physical earth, the air of the atmosphere is like the ka. It fills your body with the energy, the life force. You have the waters. So you have all these elements. The fire within you is the spark of creation. It's the sun, it's the solar element.
Right.
So basically, at the spiritual level of understanding is that you're literally a walking star in the
Right.
elements of creation.
Yeah.
And to have that consciousness, then you can start to direct the gods. You can direct the creator gods. And this is where the ideas of manifestation comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And these kind of guru ideas of enlightenment come from, is being in these altered states of awareness. But then again, the concept of dying is that when you die, it's the physical body is a unification, and then the act of dying is the breaking down and returning the parts to the source.
Right. To
So
give back.
right, but
Yeah.
the whole idea is it's not, you're not losing anything and you're not gaining anything. All right, because you are what you are at all times.
Right.
So just because you're living, you still are in these energies. You're still the earth, the air, the water, the stars, the sun. You're still all the elements combined in unification. And when you die, you return those aspects or parts, which means you are literally creation.
Right.
And that's kind of like the highest realization that these gurus or these philosophies move the mind into, and says you have to see the world from this perspective.
Right. Which now, of course, in our science eyes, we have quantum physics, so we're getting to understand things through entanglement and through an understanding of the unification on a science level. Again, catching up with what we already knew, right? Did you look at the Tibetan Book of the Dead at all?
I did.
Okay.
And I found it very interesting because it's kind of similar in a way that you have to go through different stages per day.
Right.
But the thing with the Egyptian book of, not the Egyptian, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is that you face the illusions that you've built up in your creation, or you face the illusions of the mind or the energy and karma that's been built up, which is all an illusion. And the whole aspect is, how do you recognize that? And if you recognize it, then you can move forward through it to higher levels of consciousness. Or if you don't recognize it, you get other opportunities to recognize it until you find, I guess, the womb and be reborn.
Right.
So it's this kind of journey through the afterlife. But I think the main concept is that it's a creation of the mind and understanding. And what you have to do is you have to see yourself as that God. Same thing with the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They refer to themselves as the gods. So as they're dying, it's like they become Horus, they become Osiris, they become Atum, they become these different gods as they're going through their states of purification. And it's the same thing with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's that every stage is a type of purification. And if you fail at any stage, and let's say you're sent into the bardo, or you're sent to hell, or the in-between states of life and death, you're not there forever. You're there until you realize the illusion. You're there until you realize your power, and then you step out of it, and then you go to the next level of creation. So it all comes back to the same concept of purification through fire, where you're shedding your skin, you're shedding your understanding until you realize that the light you are seeing is a reflection of yourself. And then by knowing this, you join with that light and you become the light as that God that you think is a God.
Right.
It's again, it's a unification of the spirit and the
Of self.
of self. Yeah.
Right. Very interesting. Anything with Ark of the Covenant? There's measurements to that, right?
Right. It all follows the sacred measurements of the temple, heaven and earth.
Yeah. It should, right? I mean, that's a very important thing that was taken from Egypt, from that culture, and borrowed, we'll say,
and they believed it was a power supply for
right.
something.
Just be able to speak with God, I believe, with Yahweh or whatever it was. Yeah.
Yes. So I don't know. That's a mystery, but it does hold the dimensions, the sacred dimensions that have been built into temples, built into altar sites.
Right.
And those dimensions are very specific, and they do connect with the solar measurements, the earth measurements, the moon measurements. So again, it's this reflection back of what is sacred.
Mm-hmm.
It's the cycles, and if you know their measurements, you know them.
Right. Right. Power objects to unify yourself with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
to help you align with, the creator or all things. Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's all it is. All these things are tools, or even with, I was thinking about this the other day as well, is that different cultures use plants to connect with God or what they believe is God or the self.
Right.
In Native American cultures, they use things called fetishes, which are the, let's say, like crystals or herbs or feathers or things that are sacred, like the pipe. And by using these objects, they connect themselves to altered states of awareness, and they can journey and travel.
Right.
So there's many ways of finding the self. There's many ways of working with the energies. But we have to have the mindset and understanding to go into those worlds. And our modern understanding is completely counter to those worlds, that it's very difficult for us to make that leap into those spiritual realities.
Yeah. It's the trappings. It's all the trappings. Plus, we don't have that unified knowledge of, why we're doing something. You look at the Egyptian culture from the view of the late 1800s, and it was a mystical, magical place full of ritual magic and all whatever you wanted it to be. Ask Aleister Crowley or, the Golden Dawn, and you get a completely different perspective on the symbols and the meanings and the point of doing it. But with the unification key, you know that you're actually aligning with the sun, that you're aligning with the cosmos, you're aligning with the stars, to find the self. Not discounting the other, methods and means, but a lot of illusion and misunderstandings through time based on, again, the lack of knowledge that was or became through not having these libraries, not having these this priest class teach and pass down this knowledge through time. Unless it was passed down through the Masonic Lodge. There was a story about the obelisks that were in front of the Temple of Isis when they were removed. One was placed in Rome, I believe, at the Vatican or Rome, and one was placed in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And when the one was placed in New York City, it was done by Masons with the Masonic ritual, and they put underneath it their implements of masonry underneath the obelisk. When they removed them from the Temple of Isis, that's what they found underneath them was these implements of masonry. And it's dated to, I don't know, 1500 BC or something like that. It's showing some kind of lineage to stone workers, these great monuments of stone, traditions, and potentially this symbology that you've uncovered in these symbols also passed down through time, although it seems like nobody's nobody's ever said anything like this, or you've never seen this. It seems like it's not a portion of modern masonry.
And this is why it's like I had to just put this out in this kind of simplified version of it, because
Right.
I've never seen it anywhere. I've
But
never
there it
heard
is.
I've never heard anybody talk about it.
Yeah.
And even, I have lots of books written by Masons, Freemasons, talking about astrology and talking about different things. Like growing up, you read Manly P. Hall and,
Yeah.
all these things. And it's so fascinating, but it doesn't talk about this.
Right.
And I really had to stretch my understanding trying to figure this out. I had to kind of relearn this language, but I feel like I've given the code, or the
Right.
first set of codes. Now it's published. Hopefully somebody smarter than me or someone that could see things differently will pick this up and say, okay, now I know the next 5 that go with this. And then
Right.
then it's like another story will emerge, or another knowledge will emerge that we didn't have before.
Yeah. Do you
And
think that this is all solar deity? Do you think that there may be other keys then for other deities? Because my understanding of ancient Egypt and a lot of the ancient cultures is that the priests of a specific deity or energy kind of evolved or carried forward the knowledge of that deity. You did kind of blast out Dendera with the light bulbs. I'm sure that's going to make people like, oh, come on, I know they're light bulbs. But the idea that certain temples held certain wisdom and
yes.
knowledge within them and passed them down specific to that god. Do you think there's other keys for other deities that have yet to be found?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was working on the Moon book,
Right.
and especially in Gilgamesh, and the Bible and the Ark and the Temple of Solomon. There's very specific numbers on how to build certain things, and they're all the same numbers.
Hmm.
It's also the same numbers that Plato used. It's the same numbers of Atlantis.
Right.
Like
Wherever you go, there it is.
there's the repeating numbers.
Yeah.
So, and I believe it has to do with the moon, the Earth and the moon. So it's different than the sun. So I'm going to have to really get into that with new eyes again,
Yeah.
because it's right there in front of us, but we have to kind of unify it and bring all these pieces together and make it make sense.
Right. Now, would the moon be the 13
y-
versus the sun's numbers, numericals, 24, and all of that?
Yes. And this is why the moon
12.
was demonized, and the number 13 was demonized, because, and the feminine was demonized because it was all about the mother worship.
Okay.
Right. So, the ambrosia, the sacred milk, this is all the dew on the grass. This is all witch stuff.
Right. The dark arts. Right.
Right. And they call it the dark arts. Why? It's because it's the nighttime,
Yeah, night animals, night owls. You get all the, everything is based on what's alive and happening and going on at night. And very important time night, because the stars are out and you can see a lot of things going on at night.
This is why the magician wears a cloak that has stars on it. It's everything is
Right.
symbolic to nature and the cycles. But we're kind of lost in superstitious land, and
right, and carried down very recent superstition too.
Yes,
that blocks new information from coming in.
We have to kind of get rid of that demonization. We have to get rid of that superstition and get to the bottom of, well, why do they have these ideas? How do they have these concepts? What are they related to?
Right.
How do they help us survive all these years?
Right.
Because that's what it really comes down to. And some of these things must have been very powerful because they were lost or taken away, or entire civilizations have been killed to bury certain knowledge.
Right.
And the question is, well, what have we lost? And can we recover it? Can we understand what has been taken from us?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a promise of the age of Aquarius, is that all things will be found. All things will be found out. Knowledge will become more top of mind, as it were. And it seems to be that way. You're even more proof of that, finding something that's so ancient and bringing it to the forefront.
I think there's the boomerang effect, and our society is experiencing quite a dumbing down.
Yeah.
And because of that, you're going to get people that are going to have the complete opposite effect. You're going to have people that are going to wake up. You're going to have people that are going to see things that people have not seen before, just because we're being forced to open our eyes.
Right. Forced to. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of this would be based on tragedy and massive climatic events, and the importance of the knowledge of that seems to be part of it. The great year, all of this astronomical time. Would it be that it needed to be preserved for future generations as a warning?
Yeah, this goes to the philosophy that even was put out by Graham Hancock in his new Netflix documentary. Were they trying to warn us of something that's coming down in the future? Could be.
Yeah. Happened once, it can happen again.
There's exactly like there's the idea of every year you're going through the meteor shower,
right?
The toroid meteor shower,
June and October, right?
And then every 26,000 years or so, we get to a point where we're really in the middle of it.
Oh, okay.
But so there would be a much more what would be the word? It would be more likely to be hit by a meteor or an asteroid during that time. So, we can go through this cycle over and over again and we can come out unscathed,
Right.
So it's not every 26,000 years this happens. It's a warning that during this time, during this month, during this year, that there could be a potential.
Yeah.
Because it's happened before. It's not guaranteed, but you're right in the middle of it, so there's a danger point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Mayans had the long count calendar that ended. Now, maybe they just ran out of stone to write on, but it was a completion of like a 5,000 year cycle or more than that, or something like that. If maybe I think it was around 5,000 some odd 100 years for the long count that ended. And it was a long time that people were thinking that was going to be a massive cataclysmic event. I initially thought that way back in the 90s, and then after a few things clicked that didn't happen, that were supposed to happen, big cataclysmic events, I kind of gleaned on the idea that 2012 was just a completion of the cycle and the beginning of a new one. Might not be marking a specific end of the world type of fable. But my understanding of it is that Mayans had this very elaborate system of charting multiple planets and multiple star systems, and that when their culture got absorbed, when they left the cities left the cities to the jungle and went back to tribal living, and the Aztecs absorbed their knowledge and as much as they could, they only took a portion of it. They got that, I think it was every 52 years that they would do a cycle of rebirth where they thought the world would end, and they would all run and destroy their pottery and run to the mountains to hide and see if the world was going to be destroyed. It was kind of like a big new year, but then they would come back and they'd remake everything, and it was like a rebirth of the society. And I guess the Spanish were there to witness it, so they saw this and they were like, what the heck are they doing? But it was in relation to not having all of the knowledge, We currently don't have the knowledge that the Mayans had either. So just gaining any kind of end of the world perspective on any of these systems without a full scope of what they were talking about kind of it's a fool's errand to assume,
It's kind of like, could it have been something to do with the Hale-Bopp comet, for example?
Right.
There's many different calendars, even, the Sothis calendar from Egypt, where it had to do with the rising of Sirius, which shifted. So it wasn't an accurate thing.
Right.
But I think it comes back to the beginning every 1500 some odd years. So even though Sirius was a marker in time during a couple thousand years of Egyptian history,
right,
after that, it just kind of went out of tune. So you could have had many calendars marked by different stars and following those stars until they return back to their original rising position.
Right.
But then again, it's like, if we have only fragmented knowledge of this, it could be vastly misinterpreted over time.
Well, and like having a hieroglyphic and having a face value look and not having the solar key, not
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Looking at something like that and not knowing that this is also an alignment, as a cubit is in it. I don't think I've ever heard that the cubit was in the hieroglyphics.
Well, this is the whole thing, is because the only reason that this key worked was that I realized that it wasn't a fixed position, that the measurements weren't fixed, that everything had its own measurement within it, right? So you had to find what measurement was being used. Like there was a certain code in the thing where it says this is the measurements being used. And then once you apply that measurement, it's like everything fits.
Yeah.
I don't really want to give away the disappointment of the Dendera lights.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
but the
you look at those and you're like, wow, it's pretty blatant.
Yeah. And it's the crazy thing is, it's once you know and you see it, it's like, this is something else.
Yeah.
And
but that's okay.
It's okay.
Greater understanding.
The craziest discovery of the Dendera lights is that the exact same geometries, the exact same meaning and layout and everything is found in petroglyphs in Utah.
Right. Utah.
It's like, how?
Yeah. How exactly? Yeah. And it's a completely different, if you think of it in that way, it's a totally different technology level of transcribing.
Yes.
I mean, one is very permanent and the other one's, drawn onto the stone.
But they both tell the same story.
Right.
And they both contain the same measurements and contain the same code.
Yeah.
So it's like, remember I said it's like I was always trying to like disprove what I found, because that's what you have to do.
Right.
And it's like when you have two things that are identical on different continents.
It's saying something.
It's like what do I do with this?
Right. Write a book. Write a book and write it quick because, get it out there. I love that Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is not too far from me. I haven't been, but that is featured in the book as well, because it's also it's a large object that is a serpent with the sun, and it also has an alignment.
Yes.
And
there's things I didn't include in the book that I wish I should have, but I could talk about it. Is that I really found a link. I don't know how, but there was links between the ancient Nazca culture in Peru coming up all through the United States with the Adena culture. And you have effigy mounds in Wisconsin with bears and all these things that are these huge earth mounds that kind of follow the same type of idea and creation as the same people in Nazca, Peru, thousands and thousands of years ago. So how are they connected? Was there, a way of traveling back then between those cultures? Did they share things? And I think the biggest giveaway is the symbol of the three steps. You have three steps, and you find that symbol meaning the exact same thing all the way from Peru, Bolivia, all the way into North America to the Mississippi culture, to the Adena culture. You find these three steps, and it's the same steps that are on the crown of Isis. It's the same steps on the crown of Nephesis. It's like they're identical symbols meaning the exact same thing.
Right.
This is their connection, and nobody's put this together.
Right. And it's very obvious too. It's visual. That helps.
Exactly.
But it's also math. There's also this, it's a scientific approach to what you're seeing in sacred geometry. You're applying these symbols, these measurements that are akin to ourself, to a person.
And if it was like 40 degrees, 30 degrees, it wouldn't work.
Right. If it was just a little different. Yeah.
So it's like they go, oh, you're just putting lines and they line up. Good for you. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, if you go to the pillar 42 from Göbekli Tepe, every eye on that pillar aligns with 24 degrees, except for the duck, which aligns to 15.
Well, and 15. There you go.
Right.
The duck. Yeah. Now the duck in Egypt, was that Jeb?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Earth.
The Earth. So the oldest cultures or the oldest civilizations, they gave the duck or the goose the symbol of the earth or the symbol of creation. And the story of the like the golden egg, and it's the egg that hatches, the Orpheus egg that hatches creation, basically. Orphic egg. And basically, the reason why the goose or the duck was so important is because everything is symbolic.
Right.
The duck has web feet, so it's a master. It could swim, so it's the master of the underworld. It goes on the earth to nest and lay its eggs, so it's the master of the earth. And it has wings and it flies in the air, so it's the master of the upper world. So this is why the duck and the goose was given that amazing position as the god of creation, is because they were the master of the three worlds.
Right.
And so Geb was the goose or the duck. An ancient, one of the earliest Sumerian goddesses was symbolized as the goose or the duck. So it's all the same idea.
Now, which one was that in Sumer?
Yes, I do. But I'm going to have to look in my book because it's one of those N names that are very long. Oh, where are we?
There's an N or an N.
Yeah, Ninhursag.
Ninhursag. Yeah. Now that's the. Is that not the nurse?
Yes.
That's the Virgo, basically.
It's the sister of sister and consort of Enki.
Of Enki. Okay. Yeah, Virgo. Yeah. Today's Virgo is the nurse. Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Wow. What a great book. I highly recommend it to anybody out there listening. It is full of wonderful information that, seems to connect you directly, or us, directly to all things in such a very neat and down-to-earth way and approach. And it seems to also connect us in time as a culture that goes back for eons, that extends as just being human, the arm reach. And I'm sure this next book that you're going to come out with, the Moon book, is also going to have more body orientation as well.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. So looking forward to that as well. And I really appreciate you being here today and having this discussion.
Well, thank you. I love talking about this subject, and I can't wait to share this with the world.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, you have. There it is. And hopefully when you put that next book out, we'll have you back on and we can discuss that as well.
For sure.
Awesome.
For sure. And if you don't have it,
yes,
when you read this, then you'll understand how I got to here.
Right.
This is like the book that created this book.
And I'm definitely getting it. That's for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, very interested in that as well. On the healer's path that I'm on, that sparked my interest right off the bat. But this unification factor in this, again, to align your mind and your intent in such a way when you're doing exercises, meditation, just increases the sense and feel of connection, which is just, phenomenal. So definitely looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jason. You have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
Take care. Yeah, we'll talk soon.